I'm Dr. Christy Gardner, and I get to chair our Department of Communication Arts and Theater and Arts. And it's also my pleasure to welcome you. This is our first official Fine Arts Salon of spring semester, so thanks for joining us. And this is really not supposed to be a formal lecture, but we just want to hear from some of our amazing faculty colleagues in the department, and we're so grateful that Claire Bennett-Roll is starting us off and is going to share with us some of her work and things that she has been thinking about and working on, and engage us in conversation and some big ideas. And maybe you all know her, but just in case, let me just give you some background on our faculty colleague. Claire has an MFA from Boston University in sculpture, and she's also a Gordon alum. So at one point she sat kind of where you are seated doing this work. And she also did a baccalaureate program at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston as well. She is exhibited and takes commissions worldwide, and recently had an exhibit, was with the National Association of Women Artists in New York City. We're just so grateful to have her with us in Barrington and in the classroom and on your Zoom screens, depends on where you're taking a class with her. So Claire, let me just turn it over to you and lead us in our first salon.
Sure, thanks, Christy. I'm just going to go ahead and start my screen share here. I've got some images to share with you all. Are you seeing the title page to the slideshow? Perfect. So usually when I've been asked to give an artist talk like this, I tend to focus on a connected body of work that traces my interest through a specific train of thought and its visual representation. And I usually take some time to go through my bullet point list, show areas of growth and epiphany and transformation of the work itself. And I think that more introspective and self-reflective approach on individual process is really fruitful to share with others, especially as we seek to listen and learn from each other. And it certainly helps to foster an understanding of what the life of the artist or the process of the artist truly means. I have found, however, that only looking at the artwork itself tends to narrow the scope and sometimes the understanding of the entirety of the life of the artist. And this can leave gaps in what I believe is the full comprehensive narrative of artists' work. A helpful metaphor for this concept might be to think about how the white walls of a gallery space can restrict the accessibility of an artist's work to different groups of people. It can keep artwork cordoned off or separated from the community that it was intended to serve through its making. And this I've found is especially true for a teaching artist who sees her work as a form of communication and is seeking to ground her work in current culture. One of my goals has always been to reach beyond the walls of my individual studio space and out into the community in search of ways to serve a greater purpose. So for me, this is where the intersectionality of who I am, my identity, how I see the world, my perception, and how all of my experiences, my history, my faith, my education, prompt decision-making that's contextualized in relation to community needs. So for this reason, I've chosen to speak with you all today about those intersectional moments, the spaces in between the bodies of work, the decision-making that is fueled by how the parts, the pieces of myself relate and overlap, those liminal spaces that populate my day-to-day work and my mind as an artist, as a teacher, and as a follower of Christ. So I will be showing you some images of my different bodies of work with some curatorial projects and different symposia, outreach programs, things that may be thought of as extracurriculars, but as I've sort of developed this understanding, I see them more as interwoven and as a part of the sacrament of my studio practice. So let's see here. We up to speed? The slide changed for everyone? Okay, So you might recognize that studio space. That is the Stone Studio. And as Chrissy mentioned, I am a Gordon alumna. I graduated with a concentration in sculpture. I actually ended up transferring to Gordon from Alfred University and the New York State College of Ceramics. It's a rigorous art school in the hills of upstate New York. And I ended up transferring because even as a sophomore in college, I was really seeking a deeper connection of my faith and my work. And I didn't feel like I was getting that at Alfred. It was at Gordon that I was introduced to subtractive carving in stone and wood. And I'm smiling because I'm remembering having class with Jim Zingarelli. Now, subtractive carving, as some of you might know, is a process that really calls the maker to active presence within the studio. And it challenges the sculptor to hold the paradox of visualizing form and creating form within the same moment. And it was this train of thought, holding two things at once, that prompted me to think about the already but not yet characteristics that define the realm of God. So I started to think about what it could mean for me as an individual to work toward wholeness and right relationships within our communities. So I moved from Gordon into the post-baccalaureate program at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. And during this program and in pursuit of my thesis, I conducted research that included the act of collecting stories from specific individuals in my life regarding their struggles, their victories in overcoming different types of brokenness. These stories, these narratives defined brokenness expansively. They related to things like health issues, racial injustice, gender and identity inequality. And through the collection of these stories, I was really seeking solidarity and understanding of those around me. I felt I needed to give voice and give form to these symptoms of brokenness in order to be able to overcome them. I was also on a search in my own life for a way to heal from a fairly debilitating back injury. This injury caused daily pain, immobility, inability to work, and to live as I desired. And this was sort of my own piece, or the connective piece of the brokenness that I was exploring. And it made me acutely aware of my own humanity and my own mortality. It ended up greatly affecting my psychological health. And I began creating these fractured figures that you see on the screen in front of you. I began to open up voids within the human form, the hollowness that you see in those forms there. And through these stories, the collection of these narratives, I was really seeking a way to weave my own story into the larger narrative, to find hope and joy in my everyday life, regardless of this pain that I was dealing with. So I continued this, let's say, thematic trajectory during the first stages of my MFA, my Master's of Fine Arts at Boston University. And as you might have noticed, during my post-bac degree, I had a very strong figurative focus. And this was certainly stemming from my need to reckon with my own body, being at war with my mind during the injury. But within the first few weeks of my master's program, my faculty members really started to push me toward abstraction. This push, I was told, would create more universal narratives that were accessible to all viewers, as opposed to what they called prescribing narrative, or assigning meaning based on my own viewpoint. So admittedly, you can probably tell from the tone in my voice, this was difficult for me. I'd been fueled by the pain in my own body for so long. At the start of this new learning curve, I couldn't envision working differently. I couldn't envision working in a different mode. And this new way of thinking caused a whole lot of friction for me within my process. And looking back, I find that in the end, I needed to learn to be more generous, more open to my viewer, and to allow each individual to approach my work with his, her, or their own viewpoints and their own stories. And I came to realize that this is what begins a constructive conversation, not laying out stiff arguments or refusing to compromise. So during my MFA, I was also trying to synthesize my Christian faith and my process as an artist within a secular community. And you can see from those images that my studio was packed full of explorations and investigations and the physical ramifications of a very in-depth search for meaning. And I was feeling this tension between my faith and what other people were seeing in my work. And in this tension, I sort of define now as a veiling or a softening of my visual language. And this was an attempt to mediate and dismantle to some of my colleagues, or for some of my colleagues, some of the stereotypes of Christianity. This actually ended up strengthening my faith and my work, the fact that I had to work through this. It did end up quieting my faith a bit and really forced me to be more humble and accepting of those outside of my own faith tradition. I certainly did not let go of the yearning that I felt for theological content. But what I did learn was that in order to reach beyond my own ways of understanding, I had to acknowledge that others may come to truth, and I mean truth with a capital T here, in ways that I cannot prescribe. All I can do is give forth my narrative and hope for a fruitful conversation. So as I learned to lean into this transformation, I started to find this language, or unearth it rather, in the ancient structures and artwork, as well as the spirituality of the Etruscans. I was really trying to ground my faith as a Christian in this secular environment. And to do this, I felt like I had to dig really deep. I had to return to the ancient roots and the origins of our faith. And the influence of Etruscan spirituality and art on early Christianity, to me, seemed like a striking parallel, though in some ways in inverse to how I conceptualized my own switch from what I'm calling religious work or strictly biblical in narrative to sacred secular. And that is my own vocab word. So it's not necessarily a thing. That's just how I define my work, sacred secular, work that serves a wider range of communities. So I really began to focus on the architectural keystone as the central structure for my work. And you can see that highlighted in red in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. That's just sort of highlighting what a keystone is. And I use this figure, or this shape, in place of the human form. And for me, it began to function as a Christ-like figure or a metaphor. To me, it was a visual symbol of that steadfast and quiet faith, that humble faith, a faith that binds together, that builds things up, that endures tension and stress, and allows a doorway to be created. It offers the possibility of a way through. So this is when apertures began to appear in my work, as opposed to voids. The definitional difference for me was that apertures are a way to focus a field of view, and voids are a remembrance of something lost. I also began prolific experimentation with materials. You can see some of the reclaimed materials I was interested in the images on the screen. Cardboard tubes, old metal pieces. I started working with plaster and concrete and reclaimed wood and copper. I was trying to bring all of these disparate things together and make them work in a constructive way so that these individual pieces and parts could come together to serve a larger purpose. And they could, in a way, add up to be more than just the sum of their parts. So during this time, I also ended up receiving an invitation from Roberts Wesleyan College as a part of their Emerging Artists series. I ended up installing the series Apiru, or the Wanderers in Hebrew, within a Christian community. And this helped me to visualize and understand how work that is sensitive both to the secular context, the atmosphere that I had created the work in, can also be able to function within a sacred space, or that the Christian liberal arts school that Roberts is. And in this way, I was really able to see how work that seeks to locate itself humbly in both areas can be responsive to a greater community, can traverse spiritual and secular lines. The unexpected part of this opportunity was the request by the college to purchase one of the pieces from the exhibition as a part of their permanent collection. It was displayed within the Student Life Center, and this was a hub of student activity in the arts on campus. So a lot of traffic went by every day. They also requested to move forward with a commission piece centering on creation for their dining hall. And this ended up being a collaborative enterprise with one of Robert's faculty members, and took on its form as a large-scale ceramic mixed media mural piece. So that was a really interesting experience to work with someone on Robert's campus. Through the connections at Roberts, I was also invited to install a liturgical piece at one of the faculty members' churches. And these experiences for me were really pivotal in my understanding of how my work could function in a public space. And they were very tangential to one another. So within the gallery, the public art piece within the Student Life Center and the liturgical installation led me to start thinking about how my work could function beyond the walls of the gallery, and how work that felt sacramental to me as the artist could inform and empower public liturgy. So taking a step away from the artwork for a moment, at this time, my partner Chris and I were in search of a church community. So we had moved to Boston after graduation, and it took us quite a while actually to find a community where we felt really at home. And we've been looking tirelessly for, 2.5 years. So we ended up at Clarendon Hill Presbyterian Church in Somerville. I'm going to refer to it as CHPC because Clarendon Hill Presbyterian Church is a little bit of a mouthful. And so CHPC is a church grounded in activism and has a strong affiliation with the social justice programs around the city of Boston, and specifically in Somerville. So this decision to become a part of this church community really felt relevant to where I was headed in my work at the time and how I was thinking about public space. So within the first few weeks that we joined the church actually commissioned a crucifixion for their worship space. They were really hungry for visual resources in worship, and they requested that I sort of continue with my mode of making in abstracting the figure of Christ on the cross. And this was an attempt to reconcile or bring together some traditional Catholic and Protestant imagery surrounding the crucifixion. So you'll notice the piece at its edges sort of fades into and out of the architecture of the church as the light comes through the windows. The church is a conglomerate of multiple churches in the area who had come together in the early 1900s to share their beliefs for social justice. And so upholding many different aspects of faith and different faith traditions, as well as embedding the symbol of faith within the building and its architecture, was incredibly important when thinking through the narrative of this piece. About a year after our arrival to the church, I was invited to take on the role of artist in residence. The church supported my work through the provision of a studio space and material fees for commission works within the community. Through this partnership, I was able to continue with community outreach by curating multiple exhibitions within their gallery space called the Nave Gallery. That's the space you see there. We designed as a congregation and hosted a yearly Learn to Talk series that focused on facilitating discussions surrounding social justice issues. So these issues were currently facing the Somerville community during, when was our first exhibition? 2015, 2016. I co-curated 3 exhibitions in a row, embracing differences, mending the isms and schisms, wall to wall, an exhibition that was specifically designed to have art build community. We had a traveling painting truck outside the church. Think food truck, okay? So this artist from Dorchester pulls up in front of the church, and he opens up the entire truck and out spills art. And it was just so amazing. And there was just people on the street creating and being with one another. And those are the intersectional moments, I think, that have taught me so much about my own life as an artist and what the work is, the quote unquote work is. So mentioned briefly that there was a couple of commission pieces of work during this time, as well as a show specifically designed for the congregation called Incarnate that was designed for the Lenten season. And this helped our congregation really focus on the sacrament of the artistic process in parallel to the Passion of Christ. We had a visiting artist series. Jim Zingarelli joined us for a lecture and graced our sanctuary with some of his work, as well as Scott Bennett from Roberts Wesleyan College. So another one of these intersectional things that happened as artists in residence is that I found myself performing odd jobs around the church. Because if you know your way around a paintbrush or a paint roller, and you know how to spackle walls, you know how to woman a wrench, then you are the point person for everything facility related. So I ended up fixing a toilet in the women's bathroom. I installed carpet in the basement space. I created some liturgical installations in the sanctuary that you see there that related to the liturgical calendar, which is very, very important in the Presbyterian tradition. We redesigned the church space to better serve the children in the community. The church hosts a not-for-profit daycare for low-income families in the neighborhood. So this was a really important piece of my work as artist/handy person in residence. We created a children's yearly art fair that you see below on the right-hand side. This brought community members, family members into the church and connected our kids with their kids and ended up growing the congregation by quite a bit. So that was wonderful. All right. Now we're jumping off in another direction, teaching. So as I was working as artist in residence at CHPC, I began my teaching career at Bunker Hill. And this is a community college in Charlestown, MA. And this was where teaching became a really integral part of my practice. I was introduced to an incredibly vibrant and diverse community of learners, and it really helped me begin to grapple with issues surrounding equity and accessibility in higher education. So the faculty members at that time created an exhibition that went up in the Powell Center in Chinatown called Power and Privilege that addressed just these issues. So there was performances by Ari Montefort, the work of Julio Flores, Katie Wilde, Tamlin Griffiths, all Boston-based activist artists that sort of graced the space with their work and sought to give voice to some of these social and racial gender inequalities that individuals face as they seek to further their education in America. Tangential to that was an exhibition called Woman that a colleague of mine, Katie Wilde, and I were invited to curate. And through this exhibition, we were really focused on empowering the female narrative and breaking through some of these pervading cultural designations that women find themselves with. And we were really just trying to connect our work as teaching artists to our students and hoping that this exhibition allowed us to make work from a place of closer understanding. So a couple more images here. This space should look pretty familiar to everyone. This is Gordon's own gallery. I got invited to do a solo show at Gordon around this time and created some large-scale installation pieces specifically for the gallery space. The show is called Remembering, and it was an exhibition that explored the impacts of making work about community thought process and was really tied into this idea of public liturgy and what the community could bring to the work as much as what the work could bring to the community. Right around that same time that I showed these installation pieces, I had the chance to work with two Gordon students in the mentorship program, Sophie Linnell and Justin Kettle. Professor Kettle now works at Gordon. He's teaching Modern Art Sem this semester. I worked with them just toward, in their work toward the first findings exhibition. And it was, honestly, it was my work with them that helped me to solidify this evolving conviction that this is the work. The moments spent with students, inside and outside of the studio, this is the work that needs to be done. These are the moments that my personal work prepares me for. All the reflection, all the scriptural study, all the soul searching, all the times that I felt like I was fighting with the angels, right? Wrestling with the angels. In this way, every aspect of my life became an integral part of my work and process. It was all the good work. It was all the work of the artist. So thinking through the iterations of my work in public space became really important. And symposia are the main way that artists show their work in the world, or excuse me, sculptors show their work in the world, because we can't kind of just hang our work up on the wall in a gallery space most times. And a lot of times larger sculptural pieces are just too large to fit in the gallery. So I pushed to show in a whole bunch of different symposia and ended up this past year at the Fells in Newbury, New Hampshire, working again with Sophie Linnell on a site-specific kinetic and eco-justice piece that was specifically designed for the Fells to support their eco-justice mission. And this was in conjunction with their jazz festival. And I wanted to add a video that the director sent me, but it was a little bit too long. But she took a video of a group of neighborhood kids that came during the jazz festival, and they were a bunch of little girls that had pink tutus on, and they were making their way around the sculpture, and it was a windy day, so their tutus were going all over the place in the wind, and then the paddles that you see in the sculpture there also spin in the wind, and they reflect light and bounce light off of the surfaces around them. And so it was just this wonderful moment of connection where those little girls were dancing to the music. They were refracting their metaphoric light on the sculpture, and the sculpture was reflecting light onto them. Some of you might recognize these folks. Sarah Ratzlaff, shout out. Yeah. So now we're kind of coming into the present. This past fall, a small group of students from the department partnered with CEC to create a colorful installation on the CCI patio for Gordon's celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. And we're also in the throes of facilitating a community arts project called Face to Face in order to address the needs of our student body. And that brings me to my last slide here. So we are now in the present. I'm currently working on 2 intersectional bodies of work called Where the Light Touches. And this is a celebration of light, both literal and metaphoric, and how the presence of light can reveal the individual identities of specific figurative topography. So I'm kind of oscillating back toward my figurative tendency. And the other body of work is called We've Got Work to Do. And this is exploring the intersectionality of race, gender, and the Christian tradition. Both stem from sort of extensive bodies of research based in social justice and all the connections that we've talked about so far today. So here we are in the present, currently teaching at Gordon and devoting most of my time to teaching load, helping to develop our art program to make it the best that it can be. We are in a time that is ripe with such possibility, such opportunity. We're also in the midst of a pandemic, a social, cultural, political unrest within the country. And I'm an artist, I am a teacher, I'm a Christian, I'm a woman. I'm making work from that place of intersectional liminality. And all of those moments that I see intersecting with one another, connecting with one another, weaving themselves together, help me believe or lead me to believe that we are meant as co-creators to use the skills that we've cultivated and learned in any way that we can, whether that be installing large-scale installation pieces at a Christian liberal arts college or fixing a toilet in the women's bathroom. All of these experiences I have shared, have helped me to learn in a really tangible way that the work of the artist is not just to create our own work within the studio, that the work doesn't just mean a finished sculpture or painting placed in a sterilized gallery space surrounded by white walls and folks crossing their arms and looking over their shoulders at the museum guards every few moments. The work is in the noticing of the overlooked moments, the moments that were once mundane, the inequities, the injustices, the beauty in diversity. And when we take a closer look at those moments, they can come into clearer focus, and they've now become essential to who we are, and that we are meant to heal creation through these acts of service, that embracing and defining, respecting and upholding, nurturing and making room for all of the intersectional identities at the table is our intended purpose, and it's what we've been created for. Thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it.
This was lovely. This was just so lovely on so many levels. Let's talk, y'all. Let's and I think we're a small enough group that, I mean, just like unmute and ask a question of Professor Roll on things you've seen or things that she shared. Who has a question? Yeah, Hannah.
Would you be able to send a link or email us the video that you weren't able to put into your slideshow?
Well, we'll try to find it. Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. Actually, I'll start while if others are thinking. One of the things that just so struck me about the images that you were sharing was just the diverse array of art that you have produced in your career and in your teaching. And just wondered if you'd reflect, and maybe this is just my misperception of the role or the identity of the artist, but I guess I had always assumed that method drives outcome. Like someone says, I am a painter, and then they see every question is answered with a painting. Do you know what I mean? And if you're 3D, then every question is answered that way. And what strikes me about your work is that you don't seem to be limited by, I don't know if I'm using the right word, method or technique, but it seems to me that there's something else that's pulling you, because there's such a diverse array of like stuff that comes out from you. I don't know, could you comment on just how that works for you? Maybe what
Yes.
motivates you? Because it's such a wide array of stuff. It's so beautiful.
Christy, I think that's a great, sorry, Dr. Gardner. I
Oh.
think that's a great question. So that's actually something I constantly ask myself, because going through the formal training of an undergraduate art degree that was very concentrated, specifically 3D, and then deciding to do an MFA specifically in sculpture, my vision for myself was very different. And this is not that long ago, this isn't ancient history. But my vision for myself was very different than I think I have come to see my work now. And in those decisions, I think to work in sculpture were driven by certainly a tendency or an affinity for thinking in 3 dimensions and visualizing in 3 dimensions, but also that I didn't want to get stuck being a painter. I didn't want to get stuck being a printmaker. I didn't want to get stuck in those sort of labels, I guess. And I think a lot of artists are doing more and more of this, is the interdisciplinary nature of study and of the way that we live our lives just draws us to pull from every facet of who we are. And I guess that's sort of what I meant about the talk being a little bit more intersectional, was that I don't tend to cordon myself off anymore. I want all of the options to be available to me, and to be available to employ for whatever purpose is at hand. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it really does. And it's delightful to see an artist that is not limited by those techniques or that, singular identity of, oh, I'm a printmaker, and so everything I'm going to do is that, as opposed to being motivated, as you're suggesting, even your work with your church, through issues of social justice and things that it seems to me you're motivated by something other than just like formal training, which is it's just beautiful to see the array of output, the art that you have created. Okay, I don't want to monopolize this. What other questions, things that you have? Are you all artists here? I don't even know. Are you, Professor Roll, are these your students?
They
in your
are.
classes? Oh, well then come on, this is your time. Grill your prof here. Ask her the tough questions.
Yeah, Hannah.
Okay, I have another question. So did you ever feel like, with having an affinity towards your figurative work and then needing to go towards more abstraction, you said at one point in your speech that you felt a pull back to your roots of doing like figurative work. Do you ever feel like, because of what your professor said, that your pull towards that had ever been like a little bit stifled, and that you would have preferred to stay in that area, or sometimes would like to work in that area but feel like you need to like take step backs from it and do things that are more like applicable to a wide array of people instead of making work that's so individualized?
That's a great question. The short answer is yes and no. So there was certainly friction when I came out of Gordon with a very strong figurative focus. My thesis was a life-sized carved plaster figure with hanging installation components coming down from the skylight in the gallery, as well as like I think 5 or 6 other figurative wood carvings, stone carvings. So that was a very strong focus for me. And originally, when I was pushed toward abstraction, I completely shut down. I didn't understand why my figurative work was a little heavy-handed, and I see that it certainly was, and I was trying to use the human body as a vehicle to prove something. And that was, in a way, really exploitative. And that's sort of what I meant by the language of being a little bit more gentle with your viewer, being a little bit more humble, being a little bit more open to a conversation in your work, as opposed to saying, now you sit down and listen to what I have to say to you, right? And I think that a lot of, at least for me as a young artist, I felt like I had a lot to say. And it's not that I didn't, but it's hard for someone to engage in a conversation when you are sort of that assertive. And yes, now, as I sort of look at my current body of work, I'm definitely edging back into this more figurative focus, especially because my work is stemming from a place of trying to define what identity might mean in multiple different contexts. And I think that the human form is a really interesting way, a really dynamic way to get at that. So I'm excited to see where my work leads me, and if I can still weave together these two different aspects of myself, and perhaps do it with a little more affluently this time. We'll see, but that's the life's work, right? I mean, that's what I'm figuring out, and I have my whole life to figure it out.
I had a question. I was wondering that, like, as an artist, maybe you can share your thoughts about like growing as an artist, or even just how you feel now. Like, do you think that you have a responsibility to teach and share your findings, like your findings of your personal life, or just your general like art explorations?
I certainly feel like teaching is an integral part of my artistic process. And I learn from you all as much as, well, I hope as much as you learn from me. So that being a teacher and digging deeper into a full-time teaching position has really helped me see that as an integral piece of my process. Do I feel, yeah, I feel called to share my own experiences, but also similar to the answer that we were talking about, or the discussion we had with Hannah's question. I don't want to be too heavy-handed about it, right? I mean, and I think, Sarah, you've had a couple classes with me, so I think you can kind of weave together a little bit of my teaching philosophy, right? Of giving you just enough to open space for your own self, right? Your own artistic self. And that can sometimes be frustrating. But I think there's a really delicate balance between prescribing things for your students and opening space for them to be unique individuals. And that's one of those things that if I view teaching as an art, which I do, then I also have my whole life to figure that out. I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah, but that's what I've got.
Yeah, that you touched on what I was asking about. Yeah.
Perfect.
Claire, what are you working on right now? Those last pieces that you showed us, were those from two different works, I think you said?
Two different bodies of work.
Yeah.
And they are admittedly pretty 2D. They are wall hangings. They're in encaustic, and I can actually, I was thinking I could pull up my website really quickly and show you some other images if you're interested. I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, we have like another 10 minutes or so.
Let's see. So where the light touches is a series of small encaustic relief carvings that I believe they're 8 by 10. So they're very small for me. Are you all seeing that? So let me just pull up the larger page here. So they're all interrelated in that they are exploring how light bounces and reflects on the surface of the human form. So my thinking is that I'm trying to explore, I'm trying to grapple with that line between the light and the dark and what that means metaphorically, spiritually, in relation to the human form. And what does it mean that only a part of an identity is revealed? What does it mean when a part of an identity is in shadow? And by the changing of the light, can we reveal more or less of that identity? And when I say new, I mean within the last few months. So these were all produced within the last 6 months, as well as, oh man, about, how many do I have in my studio now? Probably 20 pieces for We've Got Work to Do. So these are sort of bodies of work that coexist and are being created at the same time, that sort of touch on one another, but move in different directions. So this is sort of that more abstract, sort of layered, transparent, like focusing on transparency, and sort of this idea of movement through space in a more abstracted way, as opposed to the We've Got Work to Do series, which is really focused on very specific social justice issues. So very, very sort of solidified events that keep pulling my attention back to them, that I feel like I need to work through in my work to be able to understand, essentially, if that makes sense. And those are so new that there are no photographs of them on my website.
Oh, this is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it. It just to see that the body of work together, just really, yeah, that's great. That's beautiful. And in fact, so one of the things that I was thinking, and maybe this is what you were suggesting, that body of work seems to me to speak directly to the time of pandemic. I don't know if that's what was when you said it, especially if you're working on these in the last 6 months. And if you would reflect on that even a little bit more, that was something that I know Ryan was leading for us this past summer, our digital fine arts festival over the summer. It's a question we kind of, it motivated the festival, and we were asking all of the visiting artists just about the role of art during this time, really of crisis and yeah, however you would describe this unusual time of pandemic. I don't know, could you reflect on that a little bit and how you see what role art could play or should play during a time like this. So I guess I'm thinking both some of the social justice things that have been happening in our country, but then also this really unusual public health crisis as well.
I think for me, art functions always on multiple levels. So my process within the studio, my individual process, and me speaking about my process as being sacramental, is healing for me as the artist. So I think art in that way can help its maker to work through issues, work through things that are occurring in real time in their space, right? In the current cultural context. So that's sort of the individual impact I think that art can have on its own maker. And then I guess, Christy, your question kind of draws me back to my belief that at its core, art is a form of communication. And so if we are seeking to be located as responsive, compassionate, loving followers of Christ, it seems to me that our work, no matter what manifestation it takes, no matter what form it takes, it should reach out beyond ourselves, and it should foster right relationships. And so when there's injustice that needs to be clearly stated, that is a function of art. When there are moments of healing that are to be highlighted so that we can rejoice with one another, that is a moment where art can play its role. When there is a moment in the studio space where, or the classroom, where a mentor can just be with their students and offer a sense of groundedness or something else to focus on, that's the artwork. I guess I'm sort of getting into a little bit of mystical thinking there, maybe. But I really do think of art as being an expansive term. And I think it can function and serve the community in almost any way that we can think of.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. I don't know, anything else, Claire, that you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
I think I've talked enough.
Well, this has been fantastic. And students, I'm jealous that you're going to be taking classes with Professor Roll. I got to figure out how to get into one of those. Truly, this is just to better understand your process and just your thinking of the various intersections of your identities and how that compels you to do this work, especially as a follower of Christ and as an artist, and how you put all those things together. That was, thank you for sharing all of that with us. Thank you everyone for coming to our Fine Arts Salon, and thank you Professor Roll for sharing with us, and hope you all have a good rest of your evening.